Sorry.
So my volume's on. Hi.
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 Very well.
How's everyone doing today?
How about you?
Good.
Great.
I'm doing great, thank you. Sorry about that. I pressed the wrong button when you called me. It's like, do you know how to answer the phone? I don't know. It's so good to see you both, and welcome to everyone who's joining us today. We're so excited to be with you. I want to start by saying my name is Archi Pyati, and I work at the Tahirih Justice Center. We are today, as you see, Irena and I are wearing denim, and the reason we're wearing denim, although I love this little shirt I'm wearing. The reason I'm wearing denim today is to raise awareness about this impact of sexual assault on immigrant women and girls. Today is National Denim Day, and if you see Tahirih's Instagram account, there are some really cool pictures of people in our communities, supporters, board members, staff, all wearing denim. I do see some people tried to get away with some gray jeans, which I think it's questionable if that's really denim, but we're going to let it slide in the honor of celebrating Denim Day and raising awareness about the impact of sexual assault. So welcome, everyone. Again, my name is Archie, and I'm joined, as you know, we do work at the Tahirih Justice Center to serve and support immigrant women, girls, and other survivors of gender-based violence. I'm joined today by two incredible colleagues, Irena and Sara, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves, say a little bit about who you are, and then I'll get started with some Q&A so we can bring our guests into this conversation.
Sure.
Irena, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. Thank you so much, Archie. It's wonderful to be here with everyone and the two of you. And my name is Irena Sullivan, and I am the Senior Immigration Policy Counsel at Tahirih. I was here right when the center was founded in 1997, and I was here doing direct services with survivors, and now I am back in an advocacy role. So with that, Sara.
Amazing.
Hi, Irena. Hi, Archie, and hello to everyone who's joining us. I'm with Oxfam America. I'm a researcher. I focus on inequality, development, justice, and labor rights issues. And I had an amazing time working with Irena for over a year on this report, and I've been with Oxfam for 2.5 years.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sara, for joining us. We love doing Instagram Lives. We do Instagram Lives in order to be able to give you a little bit more, as folks who care about our mission and care about our work, a little bit more insight into what we do. A lot of my Instagram Lives in the last year have really focused on our client services work, which, as you know, is a large part of what we do. We're here to serve and support, but we also do public policy work that can include impact litigation. It can include advocacy on the Hill, and sometimes it includes conducting research and publishing reports that help us to expose some of the problems that are out there that are especially facing immigrant women and girls that we want to bring attention to. So recently, Tahirih Justice Center partnered with Oxfam America to publish a report called Surviving Deterrence. Now, Surviving Deterrence covers a whole lot of ground and really exposes some pretty shocking pieces of information that you will hear about a little bit today from the two authors. So as I get started, let me ask you, Irena, to talk a little bit about what prompted the connection and the relationship, this partnership between Tahirih and Oxfam.
Yeah, it was a really natural partnership. Oxfam has deep expertise in with working with refugees on the ground, both at the point at which they are forced to flee their home countries and also along the way as they journey to the U.S. border. And Tahirih, as a sort of complementary expertise, brings experience serving survivors of gender-based violence, such as domestic violence and sexual assault and forced marriage, survivors who are seeking immigration relief, and also our expertise is in how our immigration system itself can also perpetuate inequities and harm towards survivors as well. So it was an organic partnership from the start.
That's amazing. Now, what made you decide together to write this report? What was it that inspired the report itself?
Both of our organizations, we were partnering anyway on some other things. We both kind of realized at the same time that The US approach to the border right now has actually been leading to even more suffering for those who have already gone through so much. And there's such a high need for safety for so many survivors right now. So that was really the impetus for our focus.
That's incredible. So Sara, I know you're an expert in research. So I've done some writing and research of reports myself, and it's not easy to do, but this is your bread and butter. Can you tell us a little bit about the methodology or how this report was researched
Yeah,
and
thanks,
put
Archie.
together?
For us, when we decided we're going to focus on survivors and then we're focusing on the topic of gender-based violence, we have many conversations about how do we do this and minimize harm. We don't want to do this project, collect data in a way that re-traumatizes folks who've already gone through really horrible experiences. And how do we highlight what's going on by keeping people safe? And so the kind of big decision we made was we're going to interview providers who are working at the border. And so by providers, we mean people who are providing social services, like in shelters, people who are providing health services, or people who are doing legal assistance or giving legal services. And we were going to interview them about the experiences of their clients. And it was our way of being able to still center migrant experiences, but without putting survivors themselves at risk of having to feel trauma and retelling some of the worst stories of their life, right? And so we did interviews with providers in both English and Spanish, and we also did surveys. And we thought this was also a great way to be able to capture kind of larger trends of what's going on, because providers can really tell us about what's happened to maybe 50, 30 clients. So it was a way to also just capture in larger numbers what's happening. And we were kind of centered in how do we do this in a feminist way? So this was one of the ways. And the second was we actually asked some of our people who we interviewed to review a draft of the report, because we really wanted to make sure that what we were capturing was accurate and reflecting what they were telling us. And so with that also, I think Irena and I have such a huge appreciation for all the providers who participated and gave so much of their time to make this report possible.
So important. Thank you for sharing that, Sara. I think, at Tahirih, we work with people who are already in the United States, typically. Those are the folks who are here, who've experienced what we call gender-based violence, which usually refers to sexual assault, domestic violence, could be trafficking. It could be a whole range of types of violence. And they've been through the trauma. That's why they're trying to come into the United States. But I think what you found is that the trauma doesn't end in the home country. It can continue. Irena, Sara, do you want to talk a little bit about the findings, and maybe we then can talk a little bit more about why this is happening and how the U.S. is contributing
I think
to some
that's
of this?
exactly right. I mean, one of the, most upsetting things we find in our report about what's going on is that there are very high rates of gender-based violence at the border. So I think something around nearly 70% of our providers who we surveyed said that their clients have been raped or sexually assaulted frequently at the border. And as you pointed out, this is not in transit, and this is not in their home country. This is happening while they're waiting to apply for asylum. And we're looking at the period of 2018 to 2022. Really, our data collection ends in January 22. And essentially, it's a closed border. Nobody is being able to apply for asylum, and people are being expelled, right? And so I think, as you pointed out, what we looked at is how are U.S. asylum policies creating these conditions for this violence? Because we didn't want to talk about this violence just happening in a vacuum, but we really wanted to try and think about the ways in which U.S. policies are creating these conditions. And what we find, kind of big picture, is that policies of deterrence, so policies that really make it impossible for people to apply for asylum or try to deter them from applying to asylum or expel them once they try to cross the border to make asylum claims, really lead to conditions that increase violence and, most importantly and traumatically, normalize violence, because it becomes such a part of the experience of applying for asylum in the U.S. that people take it as a given now that this is what they have to endure in order to have the chance to apply for asylum. And we had a lot of providers say that to us in the interviews, and that's kind of horrific, right? maybe I'll pause there for a second.
Yeah, I'm curious. You said, policies of deterrence. I'm curious if you could talk a little bit more about what policies you mean. I think probably people imagine that things must be better by now, things must be changing. This administration in particular probably is opening its arms to people trying to get protection. What are some of the policies that are in effect, and how are they deterring or trying to deter
Sure.
folks from getting in?
One of the policies that our report really focuses on is Title 42, which is supposed to end by May 11th. But when we're looking at the report, it's still happening. And in a sense, what Title 42 did was didn't allow asylum seekers to be able to apply for asylum using the excuse of public health by saying we can't let people in right now. And so even though some of the other policies that we looked at that in effect, again, essentially expel people as they come to the border to tell agents I want to apply for asylum had wound down by the time our report was published. In effect, we see the same principles at play. People are still having a really hard time applying for asylum. They are still being turned back and not let in. And what our report, I think, really shows is that when you have those kind of policies, what's happening at the border is that you have people waiting endlessly. That's leading to an overcrowding of the shelters, of informal encampments. And our research shows how those are the sites in which sexual violence and other forms of gender-based violence are occurring. So as long as you have a huge concentration of people waiting, they're more prone to violence, and they have no other options. They have to remain in the same shelters as their abusers, right? Second, we find that when you have this population waiting again endlessly to be able to just apply, they've also become targets of cartel violence or other members of organized crime, who our research also finds are some of the main perpetrators of sexual assault and kidnapping. And this was one of the saddest things that we saw in our research also, was that when you wait for such a long time, you're more at risk for being found by your abuser from your home country. And we had about 30% of our providers telling us about this is happening to their clients. So these are ways in which these policies are creating conditions that increase violence. And then I think to your point about how this is continuing, one of the things that we also really focus on is that deterrence isn't just these policies, it's manifested in the way that Customs and Border Patrol agents treat migrants. And so they are focused on deterring rather than letting people in. And for survivors of violence, it's a traumatic experience. We have providers telling us about how clients are being laughed at by officials as they tell their stories of trauma, or being told that they don't have a right to claim asylum. About over 60% of our providers talked about clients being turned away by officials unable to make their claims because they were said they didn't have a right to.
Wow. It's just heartbreaking to imagine folks who are fleeing. You have to imagine you've left everything behind because the conditions where you live are so horrible, whatever it is, personally or environmentally, that you've come to the border, and now without having a chance to ask for your right, which is an opportunity to ask for asylum, you instead are experiencing this vulnerability to violence. It's just heartbreaking. Irena, if somebody is able to get into the United States to exercise their right to ask for asylum, what happens then? What does that look like? And how are people experiencing potentially, more difficulty?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And building on what Sara was saying, this is how systemic harm is actually recapitulating abuse that survivors face in their personal lives. And I think the issue, is with Customs and Border Protection, they're a law enforcement agency. They're not a humanitarian agency. They're not trained to serve survivors of violence. Sharing a story of trauma is re-traumatizing in and of itself, but particularly if you're sharing a story with someone who has no idea, what you've been through, and maybe doesn't have the most compassion, maybe resembles someone that was abusive to you back home, like a law enforcement official themselves is carrying a weapon, has a uniform, etc. And the conditions under which survivors must tell their stories are really challenging. They're suffering from acute trauma. Their abuser might be standing right beside them, and the abuser might be making an asylum claim on behalf of them together, and the survivor doesn't even have the opportunity to confidentially discuss what has happened to her, and maybe she has a claim in her own right. Her children might be there. There's a whole host of issues going on right at that point of arrival that our system has really done a very poor job of addressing from a trauma-informed perspective. If a survivor is not asked about fear of returning home, they're supposed to be, but if they're not, then they'll have to speak up on their own. And if they don't, then the opportunity for safety is in most cases, it's lost at that point. The survivor, really needs access to mental health care, physical health care. There's very limited translation services, which is actually critical. And there's very little, if any, knowledge of one's legal rights at that point, if you, in fact, make it past at the border.
Yeah. Then once you're in the system, so it sounds like you're at the border. It's incredibly hard. You're waiting. You come through, and you got one bite at the apple. And if you're not sort of ready to go, you don't come correct right in that moment, you're going to have a problem. And obviously, you've mentioned trauma informed, and for trauma survivors, I think being prepared and ready. I've heard from our former clients, they don't sometimes even have vocabulary to describe what they've been through in a language that the officer can understand. And they're not offered translation help. There's so many barriers there. Our system itself, going to court and having to make one's case for asylum can itself be re-traumatizing. Do you want to share anything about what that looks like, and then maybe help us think about what we could be doing differently?
Yeah, I think, the main challenges, particularly for women and girls trying to establish the facts of these cases, are that it's incredibly difficult to assemble and access evidence to, show that you actually did suffer these harms in your home country. There are many reasons why the harm might have been perpetrated by a family member. And then, if there's a witness, they're afraid to speak out against the abuser. It's very difficult to go to the police in certain countries. One would be because it's futile. Let's say, in your country, the government, is actually hostile to you if you try to report violence. At the same time, making a report of violence is often the only and the best evidence you might have for showing that you in fact went through it. And in our asylum system, that evidence is required. So this is another very big challenge. And to Sarah's point earlier about the normalization of gender-based violence, a lot of, and what Archie was saying too, without, not having the vocabulary for it, is a lot of survivors don't even conceive of it as, of the violence they suffered as a potential ground for asylum, because it's so normalized. Yeah. And that's been internalized as well.
Mm-hmm. That makes so much sense to me. I want to move us along to sort of recommendations, and then what people can do to be engaged in this work if they're interested. I saw some hearts, I saw some fire when you were speaking, Sarah. I think folks are excited and motivated and really impressed by the research and the work that you've done. And I want to make sure they know, what could we do to do things differently as a system, in just a couple of sentences or words. Maybe Irena, you can speak to that. And then Sarah, if you want to share, for those who are tuning in or who might be watching at another time, what can people do to help us make change? Irena, do you want to give us a little bit?
One of the things that people can get involved with is advocacy around one of our causes that Oxfam and Tahirih and several other partners are now working towards, is getting a clear statement from the US government that gender is in fact a valid grounds for asylum. Because our main concern there is that if you're someone who's coming to the border and you don't have a lawyer, which is very likely that you will not have a lawyer at that stage, you really have no way of knowing that you can even apply. And so our law is not clear on that point. People do get asylum based on gender, but the need for a lawyer to make those arguments is extremely high, and it's too high, and it shouldn't be that way. And it's not that way for other types of claims. And so to your question, as far as getting involved, I think, you can certainly contact us and we can talk more in detail about, what someone might be able to do. I think educating others that might not know these details or are coming at it from a sort of perspective that tends to dehumanize immigrants as a group. I think we see that a lot. I think, so educating people about the realities that survivors are facing, and, working with your representatives, congresspeople, to try to help push some of these fixes that we're all working on as advocates as well.
That makes a lot of sense. Don't stop talking about the folks at the border. These are real human beings. Sarah, do you have some final thoughts?
Yeah, I think one of our big asks at Oxfam America is for folks to really voice their opposition to the current, what is being termed as the asylum ban being proposed by the Biden administration. And I think it speaks just a bit to the fact that these kind of policies that are trying to really limit people's ability to claim, which is their legal right to claim asylum, are continuing under the current administration. And in some ways have been expanded back in January, actually. And so we still need continued pressure from just supporters to let your congresspeople know, to let your elected representatives know that this is not what we want and we need better alternatives. We would really urge people to continue doing that. And I think Irena's point about having conversations is so important, because we need a paradigm shift for how we think about migration, how we think about asylum and refugees. So we need kind of both kind of these small actions and also the kind of larger conversations that need to happen as well.
I love what you said, Sarah, about the paradigm shift. I couldn't agree with you more. Thank you so much for not only working with the Tahirih Justice Center, but also for helping us to promote the research that you and Irena did together and put together in this report. I'm so proud of the work that Irena did and the work we did on the Tahirih side, and I'm so grateful for the collaboration with you at Oxfam. I know that this report is so meaningful and important, and I'm really, really hopeful that those of you who are joining us here today or who are watching this at a later time will both read the report as well, which you can find on our website, or will also get involved in the work and take action the way that you heard from Irena and Sarah. Thank you so much for sharing this insight into what's happening at the border and the impact on survivors, both Irena and Sarah. We're so grateful for you both. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks everyone for joining.
Bye.
Bye.